The silence was the first judgment. It pressed down from the high, smoke-stained rafters of the great hall, seeped from the cold flagstones, and radiated from the stony faces of the Pax Council. Smoke from the purification braziers curled like accusing fingers, the scent of burning sage and ironwood failing to mask the metallic tang of fear that clung to the air. I stood alone in the center of the chamber, my healer's robes feeling as thin as cobwebs against the weight of their stares. My hands were hidden in my sleeves, trembling so violently I was certain the tremors must be visible to all. Elder Boren, his face a mask of granite and grizzled fury, slammed a heavy fist on the ancient oak table. The sound echoed like a death knell in the oppressive quiet. You have defiled this pack, Elira Fenwin. You have broken every sacred law, spat on the rights of the Moon Mother, and dragged a shadow back into the world of the living. His voice was a gravelly roar that scraped against my nerves. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, on a crack in the stone that resembled a lightning strike. To look at them was to drown in their condemnation. I was an Omega, a healer meant to be invisible, to soothe and mend, to be the quiet heart of the pack. I had no wolf, no strength to challenge, no voice to command. And yet I had committed an act of power so profound, so blasphemous, it had shaken the foundations of our world. You performed the sanguis anim, Boren continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that carried more weight than his shout. Blood magic, the heretic's art. You stood on the battlefield where our king fell, and you called him. He said the word as if it were a foul curse, something that physically pained him to utter. I could feel their collective horror, a palpable wave of disgust and terror. They were right to be afraid. I was afraid. Beyond the heavy oak doors of the hall, the king's wing of the citadel was a dead space, a wound in the heart of the pack. And in that wound, he waited, the thing I had brought back. A memory, sharp and brutal, tore through me, the stench of blood and churned mud, the screams of the dying. And Delric, King Delric Morvain, my alpha, my king, lying broken against the frozen earth, his magnificent silver wolf form fading back to the man, the light in his brilliant amber eyes extinguishing like a dying star. His last breath had been a ragged sigh against my cheek as I cradled his head. The world had ended in that moment. The pack had lost its alpha. I had lost everything. They called what I did a curse. To me, in that moment of absolute desolation, it had been a prayer screamed into the void. My own blood, spilled from a blade across my palm, had fed the earth. The ancient words I had found scribbled in a forbidden text, hidden away in the deepest archives of the healer's den, had poured from my lips, tasting of ash and desperation. I had offered my life force, my essence, anything and everything, just to pull his soul back from the edge. And something had answered. He is not Delric, another elder, a withered she-wolf named Lyra, rasped from the shadows. The man who sits in that chamber, he does not speak, he does not eat, he just watches. His scent, she shuddered. It is of the grave, of cold earth and something else, something hungry. The abomination, that's what they called him now, an echo in the shape of a king. For 3 days since he had risen from his funeral pyre, just as the first flame licked at the wood, he had been locked away. He had walked, stiffly at first, then with a fluid, predatory grace that was utterly unlike the king's powerful stride, directly to his chambers and had not emerged since. The guards posted at his door were changed hourly, their faces pale, their hands shaking when they were relieved. They spoke of a cold that seeped from under the door, a silence so profound it felt like it could swallow sound itself. And you, Boren's voice snapped me back to the present. He rose to his full, intimidating height, his shadow falling over me like a shroud. You are the vessel of this corruption. By all rights, you should be burned as a heretic. Your very presence taints this hall. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had known this was coming. I had known the price. But hearing the words spoken aloud, feeling the finality of their judgment, was a terror beyond imagining. "But we cannot," Bourne growled, the words grating with reluctance. "The abomination you created, it responds to nothing. It shows no sign of the king's spirit. But the guards say that when your name is spoken near its door, there is a reaction, a stirring." He looked at me with pure loathing. "You have bound yourself to it, girl, like a parasite. You are the key to this curse." So that was to be my fate. Not a quick death on a pyre, but a slow one, a leash. I was to be the keeper of the monster I had made. "You are hereby stripped of your healer status," he decreed, his voice ringing with authority. "You will be confined to the king's wing. You will attend to him. You will find a way to discover what he is, and if the true king can be reached, or you will find a way to undo what you have done. You will speak to no one else. You will touch no one else. You are outcast, Illyra, a ghost within these walls until this darkness is purged." He motioned to the guards at the door. "Take her." They approached me hesitantly, their hands hovering, unwilling to make contact as if my skin would burn them. I didn't need their touch. I turned, my legs feeling like lead, and walked from the hall. Their eyes followed me, 100 pairs of gleaming points in the gloom, filled with fear and hatred. I felt stripped bare, my soul flayed open for them to see. I was no longer Illyra Fenwin, healer of the Moonridge Pack. I was Illyra the Heretic, the monster's keeper. The walk to the king's wing was a journey through a nightmare. The corridors, usually bustling with life, were deserted. Pack members flattened themselves against the walls as I passed, averting their eyes, mothers pulling their children close. The scent of their fear was acrid. The silence here was different from the hall. It was a heavy, listening silence, an ancient predatory stillness that emanated from the closed doors at the end of the corridor. The 2 guards standing there were young, barely more than pups, their faces slick with sweat despite the unnatural chill in the air. The cold intensified with every step I took, seeping into my bones, making my teeth ache. It tasted of ozone, of the air after a lightning strike, and of deep, damp earth where things sleep for centuries. One of the guards, a boy named Phelan, fumbled with the heavy iron key. His hand shook so badly he could barely fit it into the lock. "He hasn't moved," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Not since dawn, just sits in the dark." The lock clicked, a sound like a snapping bone. The other guard pushed the heavy door open a few inches, and then scrambled back as if the darkness within might lash out and grab him. They didn't have to tell me to go in. They fled down the corridor without a backward glance, leaving me alone with my sin. I pushed the door open. The room was vast and steeped in shadow. The great hearth was cold, the embers long dead. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, blocking out what little light the dying afternoon offered. For a moment I could see nothing but shapes. The hulking form of the 4-poster bed, the massive table, the high-backed throne-like chair facing the cold fireplace. And then I saw him. He was sitting in the chair, his back to me. He was perfectly still, a statue carved from shadow and grief. He wore only a simple pair of black breeches, his magnificent, scarred torso bare. Even from behind, the sheer power in his form was breathtaking. The broad shoulders, the corded muscles of his back, the proud set of his head. It was Delric. It was my king. But the scent was wrong. Delric had smelled of pine and winter frost, and the warm, clean scent of his silver wolf. This man smelled of the grave, of broken stone and ancient slumbering things. My heart ached with a terrible, consuming grief. "Delric," I whispered, my voice rusty from disuse. There was no response. The silence in the room deepened, pressing in on me, stealing the air from my lungs. I took a hesitant step inside, the door swinging shut behind me with a soft, final thud. I was locked in with him. I walked slowly, cautiously around the chair, my bare feet silent on the cold stone. I needed to see his face. I needed to see if there was anything left of the man I had died for. the man I had damned my soul to save. As I came into his line of sight, I saw that his head was bowed, his long dark hair veiling his features. He seemed smaller somehow, broken. The council was wrong. This wasn't a monster. This was a man hollowed out by death and whatever lay beyond it. "My king," I tried again, my voice trembling. "It's Illyra." Slowly, as if moving through water, he lifted his head. My breath caught in my throat, a strangled, painful sound. His eyes opened. They were not the warm, fierce amber of the king I had loved, the eyes that had crinkled at the corners when he smiled. These were chips of obsidian, reflecting nothing, swallowing the faint light. They were ancient and empty and utterly devoid of recognition. He looked at me, through me, as if I were no more than a mote of dust in the air. Disappointment, so sharp and cold it felt like a physical blow, struck me. It was for this that I had sacrificed everything, for this empty vessel. Tears burned behind my eyes, hot and bitter. I had failed. I hadn't brought him back. I had only brought back his body, a beautiful, soulless shell, to torment me with what I had lost. I sank to my knees, the strength leaving my limbs. A sob tore from my chest, raw and ugly. "I'm sorry," I choked out, the words ripped from the deepest part of my soul. "Oh gods, Delric, I'm so sorry." I buried my face in my hands, my body shaking with the force of my despair. I had done this. My love, my selfish, desperate love, had done this. A floorboard creaked. My head snapped up. He was standing. He had moved from the chair with a speed that was not human, not wolf. One moment he was seated. The next he was before me, a towering silhouette against the gloom. The cold intensified, a palpable aura of frost and shadow that made my skin prickle. I stared up at him, paralyzed by a fear more primal than any I had ever known. His expression was still blank, his obsidian eyes fixed on me. He tilted his head, a slow, curious gesture, like a predator examining strange new prey. He reached down. I flinched, expecting a blow, an attack, the end I so richly deserved. But his fingers, as cold as cryptstone, were surprisingly gentle as they brushed against my cheek, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was a shock, a jolt of ice that seemed to freeze the blood in my veins. He leaned closer, and for the first time, I heard him breathe. It was a soft, slow sound, barely there. He inhaled, and his nostrils flared slightly. He was scenting me, learning me. Then his gaze dropped from my face to my arm, to the wrist I had held hidden in my sleeves. With that same unnatural speed, his hand shot out and closed around it. His grip wasn't crushing, but it was absolute, an unbreakable band of frozen iron. He turned my arm over, exposing the pale, tender skin of my inner wrist. He traced the faint white line of the ritual scar with the pad of his thumb. A burning, icy pain flared along the scar, so intense it made me gasp. It was a fire made of frost, a paradoxical agony that felt like it was branding me from the inside out. I looked down, my eyes wide with terror. The scar was no longer a thin white line. A shadow was blooming from it, dark as ink, seeping into my skin. It formed the pattern of a thorny vine, wrapping around my wrist like a manacle, a permanent mark of my sin. I looked back up at his face, my heart stopping in my chest. There was something in his eyes now, not warmth, not recognition. It was something far older, possession. His lips parted, and he spoke. His voice was not Delric's. Delric's voice had been a warm baritone, capable of commanding armies or murmuring comfort. This was a low rumble that vibrated through his hand, up my arm, and into the very marrow of my bones. It was the sound of shifting mountains and turning epochs. "You woke me, little healer," the voice rumbled, cold and ancient and full of a terrible power. "You paid the price with your blood. His soul is gone." He paused, his obsidian eyes locking onto mine, pinning me in place. "What answered is mine. And so are you. His words fell into the silence of the room, each one a perfectly weighted stone dropping into the deep, still well of my horror. His soul is gone. What answered is mine, and so are you. The claim was not a boast or a threat. It was a statement of absolute, unchangeable fact, as elemental as the turning of the world. My mind fractured. For a delirious moment, I thought this was a nightmare, a punishment from the Moon Mother for my hubris, and I would wake in my simple cot in the healer's den, the scent of dried herbs a comfort in the dark. But the cold of his fingers on my wrist was real. The icy fire of the thorny mark blooming on my skin was real. This was not a dream. This was the harvest of my desperate prayer. No, I breathed, the word a wisp of sound, a denial against the crushing truth. I tried to wrench my arm from his grasp. A futile, panicked struggle. It was like trying to move a mountain. His fingers didn't tighten, they simply were, an immovable part of the landscape of my new reality. The shadowy brand on my wrist pulsed with a fresh wave of arctic pain. A sharp, punitive reminder of the bond I had forged. He watched my struggle, his head tilted with that same unnerving, analytical curiosity. There was no anger in his obsidian eyes, no satisfaction, only a profound, ancient stillness. He was studying my fear, cataloging it, learning the mechanics of this fragile, emotional creature he was now tied to. Then he released me, so suddenly that I stumbled backward, landing hard on the cold flagstones. I scrambled away from him, crab-walking across the floor until my back hit the unyielding wood of the bed frame. I pulled my knees to my chest, a pathetic attempt to make myself smaller, to hide from the vast, empty presence that filled the room. I cradled my marked wrist, the skin now hypersensitive and throbbing with a cold that felt like it reached my bones. He did not pursue me. He turned away, his movements fluid and silent, a panther made of night. He began to explore the room, his prison, his new domain. He ran a hand over the hilt of Delric's greatsword, which rested on its stand by the hearth. There was no reverence in the gesture, no memory. He was testing its weight, its balance. He picked up a silver goblet from the table, turning it over in his long fingers, his gaze distant as if he were trying to recall its purpose. He was an alien intelligence inhabiting a familiar form, a ghost at a feast who did not recognize the food. Every movement was a fresh torment. That was the line of Delric's back, the powerful set of his shoulders where I had so often longed to rest my head. That was the shape of his hands, hands that had wielded a scepter and held the pack together through war and famine. But the spirit animating the form was a void. Grief, thick and suffocating, rose in my throat, choking me. I had not just failed to save him. I had desecrated his memory. I had allowed this thing to wear his face, to sleep in his bed, to touch his belongings. I was the ultimate betrayer. A sob, hard and painful, tore from me, and then another. I pressed my face into my knees, my body shaking with silent, racking despair. The soft scrape of a boot on stone made me look up. He was standing over me again, a towering eclipse blocking the faint light from the curtained window. I flinched, expecting him to strike me for my weakness, for my noisy grief. Instead, he simply watched, his dark eyes unreadable. The cold radiating from him was a physical presence, calming my frantic heartbeat into a slow, terrified thud. "Your sorrow is for the vessel," he stated, his voice a low vibration in the air. "The echo, it is unnecessary." "He was not a vessel," I snapped, the words raw with pain. "He was Dalric, he was my king, he was everything." For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his features. It wasn't an emotion I could name, but it was a change in the emptiness, a slight narrowing of his eyes. "He is gone," he repeated, the words flat and final. His essence was the key that opened the lock. Your blood was the force that turned it. I am what came through the door. He knelt before me, moving with a grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. He was so close I could feel the chill of his skin without touching him. "What is your name?" The question was so jarringly simple, it stunned me into silence. He knew my name. He had spoken it. Or had he? The guards had said he reacted to it. Maybe he was just now connecting the sound to the person. Elira, I whispered, my throat tight. Elira, he repeated, the name sounding strange and ancient on his tongue. He reached out, and before I could recoil, he cupped my chin, his thumb brushing against my lips. His touch was like winter marble. The gate is named Elira. He seemed to be speaking to himself more than to me. He held my gaze, and I felt a dizzying sensation, as if I were falling into the endless, starless night of his eyes. He saw more than my face. He saw the trembling healer, the powerless Omega, the heretic who had dared to tamper with the forces of creation. And he was not disgusted. He was not angry. He was proprietary. A sharp rap on the door broke the spell. We both turned our heads toward the sound. A young voice, trembling with fear, called out from the other side. My Lord King, Elder Boren sent food. The being before me rose to his full height in one smooth motion. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound deeper and more menacing than any wolf I had ever heard. It was the sound of shifting tectonic plates, of primordial threat. The very air in the room grew heavy, charged with a palpable sense of danger. He was the apex predator, and something had just intruded upon his territory. Panic seized me. The boy at the door, Tam, was just a servant, barely old enough to have had his first shift. If this creature decided he was a threat, Tam would be dead before he could scream. My promise to the council, my new, cursed duty, slammed into me. I was the keeper. I was the leash. Wait, I said, scrambling to my feet and placing myself between him and the door. It was a foolish gesture. I was a sapling trying to stop a rock slide. He was so tall I had to crane my neck to look up at him. His obsidian eyes narrowed, focusing on me, the obstacle. The menacing growl deepened. Do not harm him, I pleaded, my voice shaking but firm. He is Pack. He means no threat. He tilted his head, considering me. I could see the cold calculation in his gaze. He was weighing my words against his own territorial instincts. The boy, emboldened by the silence, knocked again, more insistently this time. My lord, shall I leave the tray? The growl intensified. It intrudes, the Shadow King rumbled, his gaze fixed on the door. I will handle it, I said quickly. Let me. I held my breath, waiting for his decision. For a long moment he was still, a statue of impending violence. Then with a slow, deliberate nod, he took a single step back, ceding control of the situation to me. It was not submission. It was a test. My heart hammering, I turned and opened the door just enough to slide through, closing it firmly behind me. Tam stood there, his face pale, a large silver tray laden with bread, roasted meat, and wine trembling in his hands. His eyes were wide with terror. He stared at me, then at the closed door, then back at me. Healer Elira, he stammered. They said, you were. I am, I said, forcing a calm I did not feel. Give me the tray, Tam. The king is not ready for visitors. But is it him? The boy whispered, his eyes pleading for an answer I couldn't give. Is King Dealric truly? I looked into his young, frightened face and saw the hope of the entire pack reflected there. A hope I had murdered. He needs rest, I said, the lie tasting like poison. Go now and tell the others not to disturb us again. I will see to his needs. Tam shoved the tray into my hands and practically fled down the corridor. I leaned against the door for a moment, the heavy silver digging into my palms. My legs weak with relief. I had done it. I had averted a disaster. When I re-entered the room, he was standing by the window. Having pulled back the heavy curtain an inch, he was staring out at the darkening sky, at the first stars beginning to prick the twilight. He didn't turn as I entered. You are their shield, he said, his voice quiet, contemplative. and you are my leash." He turned from the window, his eyes finding mine in the gloom. A fragile arrangement. I placed the tray on the table, the clatter of silver on wood unnaturally loud in the silence. "You must not harm them," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "If you do, they will come for you, with fire and silver. They will destroy this body you inhabit." "Let them try," he said, a cold smile touching Delric's lips for the first time. The expression was a horrifying perversion of the king's warm, familiar smile. It did not reach his eyes. It was the baring of a predator's teeth. "This vessel is strong, but it is hungry." His gaze fell to the food on the tray, and a look of distaste crossed his features. "This is not what it needs." He walked toward me, his silent footsteps making my skin crawl. He stopped directly in front of me, so close that the chill from his body was like a physical shroud. He was watching me, his gaze intense, piercing. "What do you need?" I whispered, my fear returning full force. He didn't answer with words. He lifted his hand and gently, almost reverently, touched the shadowy, thorn-like mark on my wrist. The moment his cold skin made contact with it, I felt a strange draining sensation, a dizzying pull from the very core of my being. It was not painful, not like before, but it was deeply unsettling. It was the feeling of being emptied, of my own life force, my own warmth, being siphoned away. My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of the table to stay upright. My head swam. The room seemed to tilt, the shadows deepening at the edges of my vision. His eyes, those endless black voids, seemed to clear for a moment. A flicker of something akin to satisfaction moved within their depths. He looked less like a corpse and more like a man. The stark, deathly pallor of his skin seemed to lessen, replaced by a healthier, more vital tone. He drew a deep breath, the first I had heard him take that sounded truly full and alive. He dropped his hand, and the draining sensation stopped. The strength flowed slowly back into my limbs, leaving me weak and trembling. I stared at him, my mind reeling with the horrifying realization. The food, the council's orders, my purpose. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. He didn't need the food on the tray. He needed me. "The ritual," he said, his voice smoother now, less like grinding stone and more like polished obsidian. "The offering of your blood, your life. It was not a one-time payment." He took a step closer, backing me against the table, his body caging me in. He lowered his head, his cold breath ghosting across my cheek. It created a conduit, a bridge between my essence and this world. But a bridge must be maintained. It must be fed. He placed his hand flat against the wall beside my head, his presence overwhelming, absolute. The scent of cold earth and ancient stone filled my senses. I was trapped, a fly in a spider's web, and the spider was finally explaining the rules of the game I had unknowingly started. "Every moment I am here," he murmured, his lips brushing against the shell of my ear, sending a tremor of both terror and a strange, unwelcome thrill through me. "I draw from you, your warmth, your vitality, the energy that binds you to this mortal plane. You are my anchor, little healer." His voice dropped to a possessive whisper that vibrated through my very soul. "And my sustenance." The days that followed bled into a strange, terrifying rhythm, a silent dance between keeper and captive. Or perhaps between parasite and host. I lost track of time, marked only by the futile delivery of untouched food trays and the slow, inexorable leaching of my own life. I existed in a perpetual twilight, both in the shadowed chambers of the king's wing and in the fog of exhaustion that settled ever deeper into my bones. He rarely spoke. Mostly he watched. He would sit for hours in the high-backed chair, a figure of frozen stillness, his obsidian eyes following my every move as I tidied the room, stoked the fire I insisted on keeping lit against his unnatural chill, or simply retreated to a corner to stare at the tapestries depicting Delric's victories. Each embroidered image of the silver wolf of the Morvanes was a fresh stab of guilt, I was tending the cage that held the thing wearing my hero's skin. But the silence was not empty. It was filled with him, with the constant low-level drain on my vitality. It was a faint, ever-present weakness, a weariness that sleep could not cure. Sometimes, when the hunger in him grew stronger, the pull would intensify. My vision would tunnel, a dizzying vertigo would sweep over me, and I would have to brace myself against a wall until it passed. After these episodes, a touch of color would return to his cheeks, and the stark, deathly stillness would recede from his limbs, replaced by a fluid, predatory grace. I was a living chalice, and he drank from me to animate the corpse I had raised. He never touched me with force. He didn't have to. The bond did the work for him. But sometimes, as I passed by his chair, his cold fingers would brush against my arm, or he would rise and stand behind me as I looked out the window, his presence a wall of ice at my back. These moments were charged with a terrifying intimacy. He was learning me, not through conversation, but through this primal, parasitic connection. He was learning the scent of my fear, the rhythm of my heartbeat, the very taste of my life force. And I, in turn, was learning him. I learned that the first rays of dawn seemed to pain him, sending him retreating into the deepest shadows of the room. I learned that he was drawn to the scent of the rare moon-petal blossoms I crushed for my healing salves, his head turning, his nostrils flaring at the bittersweet perfume. I learned that when Elder Boren's angry shouts could be heard from the council chambers down the hall, a low growl would rumble in his chest, not in defense of the pack, but in annoyance at the disruption of his quiet domain. One evening, I found him standing before the large, silvered mirror in the dressing chamber. It was the first time I had seen him study his own reflection. He was touching the faint silvery scars that mapped Delric's torso, one from an Orclan blade, another from a rival Alpha's claws in his youth. His brow was furrowed, not with memory, but with a profound disconnect. He was an archivist examining a text in a language he could not read. "These marks tell a story," he said, his voice a low murmur in the quiet room. He turned his head, and his obsidian eyes met mine in the reflection. "It is not my story." "It was his," I replied, my voice hoarse. "He earned them defending the pack, defending us. And in the end, they killed him," he stated, a simple, cold fact. He looked back at his reflection, at Delric's powerful form. "This body remembers battle. The muscles are honed for it. The instincts are sharp." He balled his hands into fists, the knuckles white. "But the spirit that drove it is a ghost. An echo I can sometimes hear, like whispers in a sealed tomb." My heart, that foolish, traitorous organ, gave a painful lurch. An echo? A ghost? "You can hear him," I whispered, taking a hesitant step closer. "Delric? Is he in there?" He turned from the mirror to face me directly. The faint hope that had flared in my chest died under the cold emptiness of his gaze. "Do not mistake the resonance of the vessel for the presence of the soul. The soul is gone, but memory is etched in the bone, in the blood. When the pack is agitated, the heart in this chest beats faster. When the scent of a storm comes on the wind, the muscles in this back tense, expecting a fight." He took a step towards me. "And when you are near..." He stopped, his eyes dropping to the dark, thorny brand on my wrist. "When you are near, there is a pull, a recognition, not of you, Elira, but of the one he felt for." The air was stolen from my lungs. He knew. This creature, this shadow from beyond the veil, knew Delric's secret. A secret I had barely allowed myself to acknowledge. A hopeless, silent love for a king who was so far above me, an Omega healer without a wolf, that he might as well have been a star in the night sky. Delric had always been kind to me, his amber eyes softening when he saw me, a gentle word offered when others dismissed me. I had told myself it was just the kindness of a good alpha to a humble member of his pack. But deep down, in the place where dreams and madness lived, I had hoped it was more. He never spoke of it, I stammered, feeling exposed. My deepest secret laid bare before this entity. Words are for the uncertain, he rumbled, closing the distance between us. His heart spoke every time you entered a room. This body remembers that language. He reached out, not for my wrist this time, but for my face. I flinched, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as his thumb stroked my cheekbone. It was still cold, a touch of marble, but the intent behind it was different. It was not hunger. It was exploration. I feel the echo of it, a warmth that is not mine, a protectiveness for something this vessel cherished. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring his face into a dark, imposing silhouette. To hear it spoken aloud, to have this cold creature confirm the truth of Daelric's unspoken affection, was a unique and exquisite form of torture. It was everything I had ever wanted, given to me by the thing that had taken him away forever. A sudden commotion from outside shattered the moment. Shouts, the clash of steel, a roar of fury that was unmistakably Elder Boren's. The Shadow King stiffened, dropping his hand from my face. The predatory stillness returned to him in an instant. The faint ghostly warmth was gone, replaced by the chilling aura of a territorial sovereign. He moved to the door, his steps silent. I followed, my own fear a cold knot in my stomach. He didn't open it, but stood before the heavy oak, listening. I pressed my ear to the wood, my heart pounding. An abomination! I will not have it lurking in our halls, a mockery of our king, Boren's voice raged. The council decreed she would handle it. Another voice, calmer, belonging to a warrior named Kail, replied. We cannot interfere. She is a heretic, a broken omega who has done nothing. The creature still lives, breathing our air. I will end this myself, tonight. If the guards will not stand aside, I will go through them. There was a clang of a blade being drawn, followed by the frightened shouts of the guards. My blood ran cold. Boren was going to force his way in. He was going to try and kill the Shadow King. He would fail. I had seen the unnatural speed and strength in this creature. Boren was a powerful warrior, but he was flesh and blood. He would be slaughtered. And the pack, seeing their elder killed by the thing wearing their king's face, would descend into chaos and bloodshed. They would burn this wing to the ground. No, I whispered, grabbing the creature's arm. The muscles beneath Daelric's skin were like granite. You must not fight him. He turned his head, his obsidian eyes locking on mine. The growl that vibrated in his chest was deeper and more dangerous than any I had heard before. It was the sound of a power that had slumbered for eons and was being provoked. He challenges my domain. This is not your domain. It is the Moonridge Pack, I cried, my desperation making me bold. If you kill him, they will all come for you. You will be forced to kill them all, or they will destroy this body. Is that what you want? His eyes narrowed. He looked at me, then back at the door, where the sounds of a scuffle were growing louder. He was considering it, weighing the slaughter of the pack against his own survival and territorial instinct. And I realized in that horrifying moment that he didn't care. The pack meant nothing to him. They were just insects buzzing outside his nest. Panic gave me a strange clarity. There was only one currency I had, only one thing he valued, my life force, my connection to him. If you harm a single member of my pack, I said, my voice shaking but laced with a resolve I didn't know I possessed. I will end this. I will find a way to sever the bond between us. It was a bluff, a wild, desperate lie. I had no idea how to do such a thing. And you will fade. You will starve. He went utterly still. The growl died in his throat. He turned to face me fully, his sheer size and the intensity of his focus pinning me against the door. The chill in the room dropped, frost beginning to creep across the wood of the doorframe. He leaned down until his face was inches from mine, his black eyes searching my soul, looking for the truth of my threat. You would destroy yourself to protect them, he whispered, a thread of something I could not identify in his voice. Disbelief? Curiosity? I met his gaze without flinching, channeling all my love for my pack, for Dalric's memory into my stare. I would. For a long, silent moment, the world seemed to hang suspended on his decision. Outside, there was a heavy thud, as if someone had been thrown against the wall, followed by Bourne's enraged bellow. Then, the Shadow King did something that shocked me to my core. He reached behind me and slid the heavy iron bolt on the door into place. The sound was a loud, definitive clack of finality. He was not going to fight. He was locking the world out. He straightened up, his gaze never leaving my face. The cold aura around him receded slightly. The immediate threat was gone. He had chosen. He had listened to me. A wave of lightheadedness washed over me, the aftermath of sheer terror. I sagged against the door, my legs trembling. He reached out and steadied me, his hand on my shoulder. Through the thin fabric of my robe, his touch was a brand of ice. "A fragile arrangement," he murmured, repeating the words he had spoken on that first day. He looked at my face, then at the door, then back to me. A flicker of cold understanding dawned in his ancient eyes. "They are your strength," he said, more to himself than to me, "and your weakness." He released me and walked back to the center of the room, leaving me leaning against the bolted door, my heart still racing. Bourne's furious roars and the pounding on the door continued for a time, then gradually faded as he was apparently dragged away by the other warriors. The immediate danger had passed, but as the silence descended once more, I was left with a new and more terrifying truth. I had found his leash, my own life, and in doing so, I had just shown the monster exactly where to bite. The incident with Elder Bourne changed everything. The bolt on the door remained thrown, a silent declaration of secession. We were an island, the king's wing, a fortress of shadow and silence, and the world outside was a distant, hostile shore. The pounding on the door ceased, replaced by a fearful quiet. No more food trays were left. No more guards were posted. It seemed the council had taken my captor's actions as a final, terrible warning. They had abandoned me, sealing me in the tomb I had opened. And the creature, the king of shadows, seemed content. The outside world was an annoyance he had successfully silenced. Now all his focus, all that vast and ancient attention, turned inward. Upon me, his hunger grew more pronounced. The passive drain on my vitality was no longer enough. He began to feed actively, deliberately. It would happen without warning. I would be folding linens, and he would rise from his chair, cross the room in 2 silent strides, and place his hand on my arm. The pull would be immediate and intense, a dizzying vortex that stole the strength from my limbs and the air from my lungs. I would slump against him, helpless, my vision graying at the edges, my body trembling with weakness. He would hold me upright until the feeding was done, his obsidian eyes watching my face with an unnerving detachment, like a physician observing a specimen. When he released me, I would be left profoundly weak, my bones feeling hollow, a deep cellular weariness settling over me. It would take me hours to recover, curled in a chair by the fire, sipping water and trying to reclaim sasab, some small measure of my strength. And during those hours, he was different. The stolen vitality animated him. He would pace the room, the borrowed life thrumming through Delric's form. The movements were no longer just echoes of the dead king. They were charged with his own dark energy. He would draw the greatsword from its scabbard and practice forms in the firelight, the heavy blade a weightless extension of his arm, his movements a blur of deadly grace that far surpassed any warrior I had ever seen. It was in those moments that the sheer, terrifying power of what I had summoned became clear. He was not just a spirit or a demon. He was a primal force, ancient and vast, temporarily caged in mortal flesh, and I was the key that kept the cage locked. One night, the weakness was worse than ever. I had stumbled, and he had caught me, his hand closing over my shoulder. The feeding had been deep, leaving me shivering and barely conscious. He had carried me, The sensation of being lifted in those powerful arms, Delric's arms, was a dizzying blend of terror and a ghostly, painful memory, and deposited me in a large armchair, wrapping me in a heavy fur blanket. I drifted in a state of exhausted half-sleep, aware of him moving about the room. I heard the scrape of his chair being dragged across the stone floor. When I managed to force my heavy eyelids open, I saw he had moved it to sit directly opposite me, just a few feet away by the hearth. He was watching the flames, his profile carved from shadow and flickering light. "Why?" My voice was a faint, ragged whisper. "Why stay? If this world is so alien to you, if you must feed on me just to exist here, why not simply let go? Return to wherever you came from?" He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the fire. I thought he would not answer. "Where I was," he said finally, his voice a low rumble that seemed to harmonize with the crackling logs, "is nothing, a void, a silent, timeless, waiting dark. Here." He shifted, turning his head to look at me. The firelight caught in his obsidian eyes, turning them into glowing embers. "Here there is fire. There is stone, there is the scent of winter on the wind, there is the beat of the heart in this chest." He paused, his gaze dropping to my pale, trembling form huddled in the blanket. "And there is you, sensation, warmth, fear, life. It is intoxicating. A feast after an eternity of starvation." His words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold of his presence. He was a being of pure consciousness, a hunger that had been given a body, and I was the most vibrant, most immediate source of the sensations he now craved. "But you are killing me," I whispered, the stark truth of it hanging in the air between us. My healer's knowledge told me what was happening to my body. I was growing thinner, my skin paler. A persistent tremor had taken root in my hands. I was being consumed, day by day. "The vessel is fragile," he acknowledged, with no hint of remorse. "But the bond is strong. It will not let you die, not yet." He looked back at the fire. "Tell me about the blood magic." The question was abrupt, clinical. "Why?" "I wish to understand the nature of my cage," he said simply, "and my leash. Your blood called me, your blood forged the mark that binds us. Your life sustains me. It is a powerful substance, your blood. I wish to know more of it." A cold dread spread through my chest. He wasn't just feeding on my ambient life force anymore. He was curious about the source, about the ritual itself. "It's forbidden," I said, my voice weak. "An ancient, dangerous art. It trades life for power, a drop of blood for a simple ward, a life for," my voice broke, "a soul." "But you did not trade your life," he pointed out, his logic as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. "You offered it, and the bond was formed instead. A tether, an open wound between worlds through which I was pulled, and through which your essence now flows." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, the firelight casting harsh shadows across the plains of Delric's face. "Is there more? What else can this magic do?" I shook my head, pulling the fur tighter around me. "I don't know. The texts were fragmented, half burned. I only learned the one ritual. It was the truth. The page I had found had been torn from a larger volume, a single desperate spell of reclamation." He watched me, his gaze analytical, assessing the truth of my words. He seemed to accept them. He rose from his chair and walked to the massive oaken table that dominated the center of the room. On it lay a collection of Delric's things, a whetstone, a rolled-up map of the territories, and a ceremonial dagger in a jeweled sheath. He drew the dagger. The blade was silver, exquisitely crafted, its edges wickedly sharp. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He walked back towards me, the silver blade gleaming in his hand. I tried to push myself deeper into the chair, a pathetic attempt to escape. There was nowhere to go. "Do not be afraid, little healer," he murmured, his voice a strange soothing rumble that was at odds with the terror he inspired. He knelt before my chair, the dagger held loosely in his hand. "I am not going to harm you. I am merely curious." He set the silver dagger down on the floor beside him. Then he took my hand. I flinched, but his grip was gentle. He turned it over, my palm facing upward. With the index finger of his other hand, a finger as cold as ice, he traced the faint lifelines etched into my skin. "Such a fragile container for such potent energy," he mused. He looked up, his black eyes meeting mine. "The ritual required you to cut yourself, did it not? To spill your own blood upon the earth." I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. "Show me." The command was soft, but it held the weight of an avalanche. "No," I breathed. His eyes narrowed slightly. The pressure of his thumb on the center of my palm increased, a subtle, insistent demand. "The bond grants me a certain influence, Illyra. I feel your fear. I also feel your compliance stirring beneath it. Do not fight it. Show me." I felt a strange, unwilling pull, a deep, instinctual urge to obey. That came not from my mind, but from the dark, thorny mark on my wrist. It was the magic itself, the very power I had used to bind him, now being turned back on me. My hand trembled, but I found myself pointing to the faint, almost invisible scar on the fleshy part of my palm. The place I had drawn the blade across in my grief-stricken madness on the battlefield. He nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He released my hand and picked up the silver dagger. My breath hitched. This was it. He was going to reenact the ritual, to take what he wanted by force. But he didn't turn the blade on me. Instead, with a smooth, deliberate motion, he drew the razor-sharp edge across his own palm. I gasped. It was a deep cut. Dark blood, almost black in the firelight, welled up instantly, shockingly vivid against the pale skin. Delric's skin. Delric's blood. But the creature showed no sign of pain. He simply watched, his expression one of intense concentration as the blood dripped from his hand onto the cold flagstones. "The scent," he murmured, his nostrils flaring. "It is strong, full of echoes." He looked at his bleeding palm, then at me. "But it holds no power. It is just fluid, an empty vessel, like the body it flows from." He extended his bleeding hand towards me. "Now you," he commanded, his voice soft, hypnotic. "Give me your hand." The compulsion from the bond was stronger now, a tide pulling me under. I fought it, a silent, desperate battle of wills, but my body betrayed me. My trembling hand lifted, seemingly of its own accord, and stretched out toward him. He took my hand in his uninjured one, his cold grip sending a shiver through me. With his other hand, the one that was bleeding, he reached out and gently took my chin, tilting my face up to his. His obsidian eyes held me captive. "I want to taste the source," he whispered, his voice resonating deep within my chest. "The power that called me. The blood of the heretic." Before I could process the words, before I could scream or fight, he leaned forward. He didn't bite my neck like a common predator. His action was something far stranger, far more intimate. He pressed his bleeding palm against my lips. The coppery taste of Delric's blood was a shock against my tongue. It was cold, unnervingly so, but then my own body betrayed me again. The small healed-over cut on my palm, the one from my own ritual, split open. A single bright crimson drop of my own blood welled up. The moment my blood touched his, a cataclysmic shock wave of energy erupted between us. The thorny mark on my wrist blazed with an agony of pure ice. The room plunged into a deeper cold. The flames in the hearth leaped and twisted, casting wild, dancing shadows on the walls. I cried out, a strangled sound of pain and shock. His eyes widened, the black pupils expanding until they swallowed the iris entirely. A shudder went through his powerful frame. He was not just tasting my blood. He was absorbing the magic within it, the raw, chaotic life force I had used to call him. It was a direct conduit, far more potent than the passive drain. He pulled his hand away with a sharp hiss, as if he had been burned. A tremor ran through him, a barely controlled ripple of immense power. He stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. There was something new in his eyes. Not just curiosity, not just hunger. It was awe, and a terrifying, dawning possessiveness that went beyond the simple bond of sustenance. He had tasted the wellspring, and he now knew its true, intoxicating power. "By the void," he breathed, his voice rough with a new, raw hunger. "It's not just life force. It's creation." He looked from my terrified face to the single drop of blood on my palm, then back. The last vestiges of Delric's echo seemed to burn away in his gaze, consumed by the sheer, primal avarice of the entity within. He was no longer just a shadow wearing a king's face. He had tasted my blood, my magic, and in doing so, he had found the key to making this world, this body, truly his own. And I, the foolish heretic who had tried to bargain with death, had just handed it to him. The act of sharing blood, forced upon me as it was, created a new and terrifying depth to our connection. The bond was no longer a simple one-way siphon. It was a bridge, a two-way conduit of sensation and nascent emotion. I could feel him now, not just as a cold presence, but as a consciousness brushing against my own. I felt the stark, endless loneliness of his existence before my call. I felt his insatiable curiosity about the physical world, the alien wonder of feeling rain on his skin, or the warmth of the fire. And most terrifyingly, I felt the burgeoning, possessive avarice he held for my life, my magic, which he now saw as one and the same. He no longer fed on me with detached necessity. The feedings became deliberate, almost ritualistic. He would corner me, his presence overwhelming, and demand my wrist. He would press his lips to the thorny mark, and I would feel the familiar drain, but now it was laced with a chilling intimacy. It was a predator's kiss, a claim renewed. The power he drew from me made him stronger, more vital. Elric's body, once just a vessel, was now becoming his own. The movements were less borrowed, the expressions less a hollow imitation. The shadow was taking root, weaving itself into the very fabric of the flesh it inhabited. And with his strength came a new, unsettling confidence. He began to speak more, asking questions not just about magic, but about the world, about the pack, about Delric. He would sift through the echoes of the king's memories, plucking out images and sensations he didn't understand, and demand I explain them. "There is a memory here," he said one afternoon, his eyes distant, "of a child, a girl with hair the color of straw, laughing as this body lifts her onto its shoulders. The feeling associated with it. It is a painful warmth. What is it?" "That was Alara," I answered, my voice tight. "His niece. She died of the red fever 5 winters ago. He loved her dearly. He processed this, his dark gaze unreadable. Love," he repeated the word as if it were a foreign object on his tongue. "Is that the name for the bond he felt for you?" "No," I said quickly, turning away to hide the flush of pain and embarrassment that rose in my cheeks. "That was different." "Yes," he agreed, his voice a low murmur from behind me. It was quieter, less painful, more necessary, like the need for air after being underwater. His perception, his ability to analyze the phantom emotions of a dead man, was unnerving. He was a scholar studying the ruins of a life, and I was his unwilling guide. This new intimacy, this forced sharing of memory and sensation, was a prison of its own, but within it, a desperate, dangerous plan began to form in my mind. The texts I had studied, fragmented as they were, had spoken not just of calling, but of binding and banishing. The rituals were complex, requiring immense power and a terrible price. I had no power of my own, but I was bound to a being who was now brimming with it. My power filtered through him. If the bond was a conduit, perhaps it could be used for more than feeding. Perhaps I could use it to access the very magic I had given him. I began to subtly test the connection. When he slept, a strange death-like stillness he entered for a few hours in the deepest part of the night, I would focus on the thorny mark on my wrist. I would reach out with my mind, not with a command, but with a question, a gentle probe along the invisible thread that linked us. At first, I felt nothing but his cold, alien consciousness, a vast and silent landscape. But slowly, I began to sense the energy simmering within him, the life force he had taken from me, now refined and amplified by his own ancient nature. My chance came unexpectedly. A week after the blood-sharing, a commotion outside our bolted door startled us both. It wasn't the angry challenge of Elder Boren this time, but a chorus of panicked shouts, the smell of smoke, and the unmistakable roar of a rogue shifter, a wolf driven mad by sickness or rage. It was a rare, terrifying occurrence, a wolf who could no longer control its shift, turning on its own pack. The Shadow King went to the window, peering through the narrow gap in the curtains. I followed, my heart pounding. In the courtyard below, chaos reigned. A huge, grizzled wolf, its fur matted with blood and its eyes glowing with a feverish madness, was rampaging through the market stalls. Pack warriors were trying to surround it, but it was unnaturally strong and fast, tearing through up their ranks with brutal, indiscriminate fury. I saw Kyle, the warrior who had spoken up for me, go down with a savage bite to his leg. "They are losing," the Shadow King observed, his voice flat, analytical. "They need their alpha," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I looked from the carnage below to the creature beside me, the being wearing the alpha's face. He felt my gaze and turned to me. "This body wants to intervene," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "The echo of the protector is strong." He flexed his hands, the warrior's instincts stirring in borrowed limbs. "But the alpha is dead." "But you are not," I said, my voice gaining a desperate strength. My plan, half-formed and reckless, solidified in that moment. This was my chance. "They see Delric's face. If you go down there, if you stop that rogue, they will see their king has returned. They will rally. You will save them." He laughed, a cold, empty sound. "Why would I save them? They are nothing to me. They would have burned you. They locked you in here with me. Let them perish." "Because I'm asking you to," I said, stepping in front of him, forcing him to look at me. I put every ounce of my will, my desperate love for my pack, into my gaze. "I am your anchor, your sustenance. You said you enjoyed the sensations of this world. Do you think you will enjoy them as much when the world is burning around you? When the only thing left is the fear and screams of the dying? Do this for me, and I will give you what you want." His eyes narrowed. "What I want?" "Blood," I said, the word tasting like ash. I held up my wrist, the dark mark a stark contrast to my pale skin. "Willingly, as much as you need. No more fighting, no more resistance. Just save them." He stared at my wrist, then back at my face. A slow, cold smile spread across his lips. It was the smile of a predator that had just been offered the keys to the flock. The hunger in his eyes was a raw, physical force. "A dangerous bargain, little healer." "I know," I breathed. "Do we have a deal?" He gave a sharp, decisive nod. "We do." He moved with a speed that blurred, throwing open the chamber doors that had been sealed for weeks. The heavy bolt screeched in protest. He didn't bother with a sword or armor. He strode out into the corridor, bare-chested and armed only with the preternatural power thrumming through his veins. I ran after him, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Pack members in the corridors recoiled in shock and terror at the sight of him. Whispers of the king and the abomination followed in our wake. He ignored them, his focus entirely on the chaos in the courtyard. He vaulted over a balcony, landing in the center of the fray, with a ground-shaking impact that sent dust and debris flying. The rogue wolf, which had been standing over the injured Kyle, whipped around, its lips peeled back in a feverish snarl. It was huge, but the Shadow King in Elric's body was larger, his presence a vortex of cold authority that silenced the courtyard. The rogue lunged. What happened next was not a fight. It was an execution. The Shadow King didn't shift. He didn't need to. He met the rogue's charge, his movements a symphony of impossible speed and brutal efficiency. He sidestepped the snapping jaws, his hand lashing out to grip the wolf's thick neck. There was a sickening crack of bone, and the massive rogue went limp, collapsing to the ground, dead before it hit the stones. A collective gasp went through the assembled pack. They stared, frozen, at the man who looked like their king, standing over the dead rogue, not a scratch on him. His chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths, his obsidian eyes sweeping over the stunned crowd. He had saved them. He had fulfilled his part of the bargain. Now it was my turn. As I ran to Kyle's side, my healer's instincts taking over, I felt the Shadow King's gaze lock onto me. The hunger in that look was a palpable promise. Later, it seemed to say. Over the next few hours, I was Elira the healer again. I directed the others, my voice, once stripped from me, now clear and commanding. I stitched Kyle's wound, set a broken arm, and brewed calming draughts for the terrified. And through it all, I was aware of him. He stood apart watching, a silent, menacing statue of a king. The pack gave him a wide berth, their fear now mixed with a heavy dose of awe. By the time night fell and I returned, exhausted, to the king's wing, he was waiting for me. He stood by the fire, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. "You have done well, little healer," he said, his voice a soft purr. "You have reminded them of your value. And now, you will fulfill your part of our agreement." My mouth was dry. My hands trembled. This was it. The moment my plan would either succeed or fail, catastrophically. "I will," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I walked towards him, stopping directly in front of him. I held out my arm, but I didn't offer my wrist. I focused my will, not on resisting him, but on the bond itself, on the conduit. I reached through it, towards the vast reservoir of my own power that now resided in him, amplified and perfected. I pictured the ancient runes of binding and banishing, the symbols I had pored over in the forbidden texts. He reached for my arm, his fingers cold against my skin. The moment he made contact, I acted. I poured my will, my intent, my very soul into the bond. Bind him, banish him. I wasn't trying to sever the connection. I was trying to reverse the flow. A bolt of pure white-hot agony shot through me. The thorny mark on my wrist didn't burn with cold, but with searing fire. He roared, a sound of fury and surprise, and stumbled back. The power, his and mine intertwined, was a wild, untamed thing. It was too much. The runes I had visualized shattered in my mind. The strain was unbearable. He recovered instantly, his eyes blazing with a black fire. "Trickery!" he snarled. He lunged for me, no longer the detached observer, but a predator whose prey had dared to bite back. I scrambled away, my plan in ruins. I hadn't been strong enough. The connection wasn't stable enough. I needed more, a stronger focus, a sacrifice. My eyes fell on the ceremonial silver dagger he had left on the table. The blood magic. It started with blood. It would end with blood. Not his, not just a drop of mine. A true offering, a life for a soul. My life to banish the thing that had taken his. With a surge of desperate adrenaline, I snatched the dagger from the table. He was almost on me, his hand reaching. "I'm sorry, Delric," I whispered to the ghost of the man he had been. I didn't turn the blade on him. I turned it on myself, plunging the silver dagger deep into my own heart. The pain was a blinding sun, a nova of agony that consumed everything. The Shadow King froze, his hand inches from me. His eyes widened, not with triumph, but with a sudden stark horror. The bond, our bridge, was now a conduit for my death. He felt the silver blade pierce my flesh as if it were his own. He felt my heart stutter, my lifeblood, his sustenance, pouring out. The thorny mark on my wrist flared with a blinding black light, then crumbled into dust. The tether was broken. His face contorted in a silent scream of agony. The power I had given him, the life force that anchored him to this world, was gone. The shadows that clung to him began to unravel, peeling away from Delric's form like smoke in the wind. He was being forcibly ejected, banished back to the silent, waiting dark he had come from. I collapsed to the floor, the dagger in my chest a cold weight. My vision was fading to black. Through the haze of death, I saw Delric's body slumped to its knees. The obsidian emptiness in his eyes flickered, and for one single impossible moment, I saw a glimmer of warm, familiar amber. A single word, a name formed on his lips. A voice I hadn't heard since the battlefield. A voice I had damned my soul to hear again. Illyra, darkness, and a profound, weightless silence. This was not the chilling, predatory silence of the Shadow King's chamber, but a vast, peaceful emptiness. The pain was gone. The fear, the guilt, the unending exhaustion, all of it had been washed away, leaving only a serene and final stillness. Was adrift in a gentle, starless night, a soul untethered. So this was death. It was not the torment I had been promised for my heresy, but a quiet, welcome rest. My sacrifice had been absolute. I had saved them. I had saved him. It was enough. A warmth bloomed in the cold void. It was a tiny, distant flicker at first. A single candle in an infinite cavern. It did not belong here. The void was defined by its lack of heat, its lack of light. But the warmth grew, a soft, insistent pulse that pushed against the emptiness. It felt familiar. It felt like the memory of sunlight on a winter's day, like the heat from a hearth on the coldest night. It felt like home. Then came a voice, woven into the warmth. It was not the rumbling, ancient resonance of the shadow, but a true voice, a warm baritone frayed with desperation. It was a prayer, a plea, a command, all at once. Illyra, don't you dare leave me. Come back. By the Moon Mother, you come back to me. Da Elric. His voice was a lifeline thrown across the abyss. It wrapped around my fading consciousness, a tether of pure, desperate love. He was calling me, just as I had once called him. But his call was not born of forbidden magic and selfish grief. It was forged from his very soul, a raw, powerful cry that defied the silence. The peaceful emptiness began to feel wrong, like a cage I had willingly entered, not knowing the door could still be opened from the outside. The warmth intensified, pulling me, drawing my scattered essence back towards a single, aching point of light. The first sensation was pain, a deep, agonizing throb in my chest, a fire where the dagger had been. It was a terrible, beautiful pain, because it meant I was alive. The second sensation was touch. A large, warm hand was holding mine, the grip firm, possessive, grounding me. The scent of pine and winter frost, the true scent of my king, filled my senses, chasing away the phantom smell of cold earth and the grave. My eyelids were heavy as stones, but I forced them open. The world swam into focus, a blur of firelight and shadow. I was in the king's bed, swathed in furs. The great hearth was blazing, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. And sitting on the edge of the bed, his broad shoulders slumped, his head bowed over our joined hands, was Delric. He was truly Delric. His hair was not just a dark mass, but had faint silver threads that caught the light. His skin was not the color of corpse flesh, but was warmed with life. He wore a simple tunic, and I could see the steady living pulse in the vein of his neck. As if sensing my gaze, he lifted his head. His eyes, his brilliant, fierce amber eyes, met mine. They were filled with a storm of emotions, grief, relief, boundless love, and a profound, bone-deep weariness. Tears tracked paths through the grime on his face. Illyra, he breathed, his voice cracking. He brought my hand to his lips, his kiss a desperate, reverent touch against my knuckles. You foolish, brave, impossible woman. You're back, I whispered, my voice a dry, rasping thing. My chest ached with every word. Truly back. Only because of you, he said, his gaze intense. That thing, It had me trapped, Elira, a prisoner in my own body. I was a whisper in a hurricane, a ghost rattling chains he could not hear. I saw what it did. I saw it through a haze, like watching a nightmare through a sheet of ice. I felt it feeding on you, and I could do nothing but scream into the silence. He squeezed my hand, his thumb stroking my skin. When you drove that blade into your heart, I felt it. The bond between you and the shadow shattered, and in that moment of absolute void, as it was torn away, there was a door. Your sacrifice opened the way back for me. I felt your soul slipping away, and I refused it. I would not lose you again. How? I rasped, touching my chest. Beneath the bandages, the skin was tender and sore, but it was whole. The wound that should have killed me was gone. The alpha line of Morvain has an old magic in its blood, he explained, his voice low. A gift from the Moon Mother, they say. The ability to give our own life force to mend another. It is a dangerous gift, one that can kill the giver if the wound is too great. I held you, and I poured everything I am into you. I anchored your soul to mine, and I did not let go. He had saved me with the very essence of his life, a perfect loving reversal of the shadow's parasitic hunger. Tears streamed from my eyes, hot and cleansing. All the pain, all the heresy, all the sacrifice had led to this, to him, whole and real and here. The pack, I began. They know, he said, anticipating my question. They know you saved me when I carried you from this room, bleeding and dying in my arms, and they saw the light back in my eyes. They understood. Elder Born fell to his knees. He called you the pack's shield maiden. They are calling you a saint, not a heretic. The irony was so sharp it was almost painful. The woman they had condemned was now their savior. For a week I healed. Dielric never left my side. He fed me broth with his own hands, changed my bandages, and told me stories of the pack, of his plans, of the long years he had watched me from afar. He confessed that the shadow had been right, that he had cherished me in secret, always held back by his duty and my station as a wolfless Omega. He had believed I needed a strong, wolf-blooded mate to protect me, never realizing that my strength was of a different, far more profound kind. On the 7th day, when my strength had returned, he led me out onto the high balcony of the King's Wing. It was night. A canopy of brilliant cold stars glittered overhead, and a full silver moon bathed the world in ethereal light. The pack was gathered in the courtyard below, a sea of upturned faces, their eyes gleaming in the dark. They were not holding torches of condemnation, but candles of vigil. When they saw us, a collective sigh of relief and reverence went through the crowd. Dielric raised our joined hands. His voice, now fully restored to its kingly power, boomed across the silent courtyard. You see before you Elira Fenwin, not a heretic, but the heart of this pack. She walked into the shadow of death to pull her alpha back into the light. She has no wolf of her own. Because her spirit is the spirit of the pack itself. She is not your Omega. She is your queen. A stunned silence, then a single howl rose from the crowd, then another and another, until the very stones of the citadel vibrated with a chorus of joyous, full-throated approval. It was a sound of healing, of a pack made whole again, stronger than before. I looked at Dielric, my heart overflowing. He turned to me, his amber eyes glowing with a love so fierce it took my breath away. He was no longer just a king, and I was no longer just a healer. We were two souls who had crossed the abyss for each other. The thorny mark on my wrist was gone, replaced by a faint, silvery scar that shimmered in the moonlight, like a constellation etched into my skin. It was no longer a brand of damnation, but a testament to our journey. I was lost in shadow, Elira, he murmured, his voice for me alone. He gently touched the scar on my wrist, his warmth seeping into my skin. You brought me back to the starlight. He leaned down, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not one of desperate need or frantic relief, but of profound, settled certainty. It was the sealing of a bond far stronger than blood magic, a promise of a shared dawn after the longest night. In his arms, under the watchful eyes of the moon and the stars, I was finally home. We were two halves of a single soul, one who had been lost to shadow, the other who had commanded the stars, and together we were crowned,